Andrew Bolt on 7:30 last night, and that continues. OK, let's go to the United States now, where Barack Obama has overnight unveiled plans to reduce carbon emissions by 30% by the year 2030. North America correspondent Lisa Miller says the target is ambitious.
That is big news in a country that has struggled to reduce its carbon emissions in the past. There are around 600 coal-fired power plants in America, and they are the ones that are being targeted. The president has been accused before of having a war on coal. Now you can imagine it's absolutely going to start. Interestingly, given how much pre-promotion there was about this announcement, it wasn't the president himself who was doing it, it was the head of the EPA, Gina McCarthy. Let's have a little listen to her.
Although we limit pollutants like mercury, arsenic, sulfur, currently there are no limits on carbon pollution from power plants, our nation's largest sources. For the sake of our family's health and for our kids' future, we have a moral obligation to act on climate.
It's rather interesting that Barack Obama didn't make the announcement himself, because it is being seen, as you know, Lisa, widely as his last-ditch attempt to create something of a domestic legacy as his second term draws to a close.
Yes, and he's always indicated that it was important to him. Perhaps the timing, he's heading off to Europe this evening. He did issue a video, a White House YouTube video on Saturday night. That seems to be the preferred manner of getting news out sometimes, where he addressed the issue. And he also got on a conference call this afternoon, Michael, from the Oval Office with various health organisations, the American Lung Association, stressing the health aspects, as we just heard from Gina McCarthy.
Lisa Miller there now to discuss how that announcement will affect Australia and indeed the broader global negotiations on climate change. We're joined by Amanda McKenzie. She's the Chief Executive of the Climate Council. Amanda McKenzie, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Firstly, let's start in the United States. This is a very ambitious target of cutting carbon emissions by 30% by 2030. It's going to be much easier said than done, isn't it?
Well, you may be surprised that the US already has a 17% reduction target by 2020, and they are on track to meet that target. So it's perhaps not as ambitious as we might think, because the US has been a laggard in the past. But this announcement is very positive because it sees them moving to be a leader in the world, and it will have significant ripple effects right around the globe.
And how will it work in practice?
Well, what they're doing is a mechanism of putting on this national target, but then seeing it implemented through the states. So the states can choose a number of different ways in which they implement the scheme. So it could be by increasing renewable energy, it could be by energy efficiency or other sorts of mechanisms. So there is a flexibility built in, and the EPA has stated that they think that's really important in allowing it to be implemented effectively and particularly cost effectively in different states.
Barack Obama clearly wants to make this a domestic policy achievement in his second term in the Oval Office, and also kickstart those global talks on climate change. What impact do you think it will have on where the rest of the world is going on addressing carbon emissions?
I think the whole world has been looking for the US to take a leadership role, and in some ways they have in the US states. So California, for instance, already has an emissions trading scheme that's proving to be quite effective, and they are one of the biggest economies in the world in their own right. But to see the US nationally taking such ambitious steps is very important, and whether it's China or Europe or India, Brazil, everyone around the world in this space has been looking to America, and I think it will have a very significant impact working up to the Paris negotiations at the end of 2015, which we hope to see significant global agreement.
But equally the challenge is, let's say for argument's sake, America reaches that target by 2030 and there is no similar action from countries like China and India, so any cuts in America will be swamped by rising emissions in the developing countries.
Well, actually, China and India are also taking significant action. The new Indian Prime Minister, who came in very recently, has promised to put a solar panel on every home in India, and that's a very positive development. Similarly, in China, we're seeing huge investment in wind and solar technology. In fact, the significant Chinese investment in solar is actually one of the big drivers that's driven down the price of solar panels all around the world, including in Australia, where we've seen significant drops in price.
And where does the new American policy announced overnight, or how does that stand up against the policy here in Australia?
Well, it is different to what we've seen in Australia, but there will be similar elements to, in some of the states, to our previous carbon pricing scheme that is obviously under debate at this time. The US also has some vehicle standards that are significantly greater than in Australia. But I think the most important thing probably will be in terms of the target. Australia has a 5% reduction target by 2020, whereas, as I mentioned, the US has a 17% reduction target. And Australia's own climate authority has said that we need to increase our target to 19% by 2020 if we're going to be in line with the rest of the world. And what we could expect from this US announcement is to have additional pressure from the US on Australia to pull its weight in the global community.
Do you expect that pressure will come rather directly when Barack Obama sits down and personally meets Tony Abbott in Washington in a few weeks' time?
You'd have to expect that that would be part of the conversation, and as well part of the conversation during the G20. The US has pushed to put climate change on the agenda when they meet in Australia later this year. So I think there'll be a lot of behind-the-scenes pushing from the US for Australia and other countries to do more and to step up to their level of action.
Amanda McKenzie, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's go to Virginia now with a story about Australia's